Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, Wooden Railway Adventures, Episode 211, Roundhouse Roulette. The Great Railway Show was taking place on the mainland, and engines from all over the world were flocking to the grand festival. To the surprise of Sir Topham Hatt and the Sodor engines, their railway had been chosen as a staging area while the events were taking place, and soon Vickerstown Station was crowded with international engines. "Well, I certainly didn't see this coming," said Sir Topham Hatt. "What's going on?" asked Thomas. "What are all of these strange engines doing here?" "It appears that Sodor was elected as the official queuing area for the Great Railway Show. Since I had to abandon those important meetings when Sailor John was causing all of that trouble, I wasn't there to provide any input on the decision. Granted, it does make some sense since Sodor is right next to the mainland, but I would have liked to have had some heads up on the matter." "Well, we need to do something with them," said Percy. "They're clogging up the entire station." "Agreed. You two, please escort these engines to Vickerstown sheds for now, while I make some telephone calls and try to fix this mess." Thomas and Percy smiled. They liked being in charge of important decisions. "Attention, everyone," shouted Thomas. "Attention, please." But nobody was listening. The engines kept chatting as if nothing had happened. "Hello, everyone," peeped Percy. "Thomas here has an important message." But Percy's quiet voice was drowned out too. The engines stared at each other. "This isn't going to work," sighed Thomas. "We need someone with a big voice." "Silence!" boomed a mysterious engine. Everyone stopped talking at once and they looked at Thomas and Percy. "Who was that?" they gasped. "Don't you remember?" chuckled the engine. "It's me, Flying Scotsman. I know it's been a while, but I never thought I was that forgettable." Thomas and Percy laughed. "It's so nice to see you again," they smiled. "You look better than ever," added Thomas. "But what are you doing here anyway?" "I'm part of the Great Railway Show, of course. I was told to come to Sodor before my competitions began, and it looks like I wasn't the only one who got the message." "Oh, right," said Thomas. "Hello, everyone. Welcome to the island of Sodor. My name is Thomas, and this here is—" "Ah, shut it," said one of the engines. "We was having a nice conversation here before your green snake friend told us all to be quiet. Nobody tells us what to do. Get lost, losers." Thomas and Percy were petrified. They hadn't expected the new engines to be so mean. "Don't speak for all of us," said another. "These engines belong here. This is their railway. We are merely their guests. Please, continue." "Oh, thank you," said Thomas quietly. "As I was saying, I'm Thomas, this is Percy, and you've all probably heard of the Flying Scotsman. Please follow us to the shed so that you can get some rest before your big events tomorrow." The international engines murmured happily at the news. By that evening, they had all been moved out of the station and into Vickerstown sheds. "Some of you will have to sleep outside," said the Flying Scotsman, "but the weather is beautiful here. You'll fall asleep looking at the stars each night. Believe me." "Phew," sighed Percy. "That was hard work. Thank you so much for helping us, Flying Scotsman. Nobody listens to little engines like us, but they certainly pay attention to a big guy like you." "Of course. It was nice to see you two again. If you don't mind, I think I'm going to spend the night here with all of my new friends." "That's a great idea," said Thomas. "We'll see you all tomorrow. Come along, Percy. It's time we got back to our own sheds." But as soon as Thomas and Percy puffed away, Billy and Rosie rolled up. "What are all of these engines doing here?" asked Billy. "Normally there's nobody at these sheds." "Hey, you, big guy, that's my spot." "Billy, that's no way to treat these engines," said Rosie. I don't know who they are, but they must be here for a good reason. Come on, let's go find somewhere else to sleep." And so the mad shuffle began. With Vickerstown sheds filled to the brim, Billy and Rosie were forced to go somewhere else. They found space at the Search and Rescue Center, but then Belle and Flynn were pushed out. Those two decided to spend the night at the quarry, which left no room for Bill and Ben. They ended up taking Whip and Scruff's spots at the scrapyard, who in turn took up Logan and Sam's places at the coal depot. Before long, every engine was being pushed from their usual sleeping locations. By the time Thomas and Percy got back to Tidmouth, there was no room for either of them. "Cinders and ashes!" cried Thomas. "What's all this about?" "Sorry, Thomas," said Edward, "but with the great railway show engines occupying Vickerstown tonight, everybody's been forced to find new sheds." Just then, Toby puffed up with Henrietta. "I just got kicked out of my own shed by some bossy boilerhead named Vinny," he complained. "This is outrageous." But the engines in the shed found it hard to sympathize with the latecomers. "You should have gotten here earlier, Thomas," said James. "Just because you're the number one engine doesn't mean there's always going to be a spot reserved for you." "Hey, we were out helping the new engines find a place to sleep," protested Percy. "That's why we were late. We couldn't just leave them at the station." "So this is all your fault," said Henry. "You're the ones who let them take over Vickerstown sheds, and now you're paying the price. I don't see what the problem is." Thomas was very upset. "Those were Sir Topham Hatt's orders," he said crossly. "Thank goodness he's not here to see how selfish you all are being. Come on, Percy and Toby, let's go find someplace else to sleep." And the three engines puffed away. "At last, some peace and quiet," murmured Murdoch. "Enjoy that roof over your head while you can," chuckled Daisy. "When it comes time to pull the trains tomorrow, everybody's going to snatch up the nicest berth they can get." Suddenly, it occurred to the engines that as soon as they left the sheds in the morning, their spots were going to be taken. Then they would end up without a place to sleep like Thomas, Percy, and Toby. "You know what?" said James quietly. "I'm not really looking forward to pulling the express tomorrow. You can take it, Henry." "Oh, no, thank you. I was just about to give away my goods train to Hank." "Sorry, fellers, but I'm thinking about taking a rest day tomorrow, too," he said. And so the arguing commenced. None of the engines wanted to leave the sheds for fear of losing their spots, and in the morning nothing had been resolved. "James, you are going to be late," shouted Sir Topham Hatt. "Why haven't you left yet?" "Sorry, sir, but I'm just not up to the task today. Boiler ache, I believe." "Hey, you stole my excuse," wheezed Henry. "Sir, James is faking it. He just doesn't want to leave the sheds because he'll lose his precious spot." "You're doing the same thing," countered James. "In fact, we are all doing the same thing," said Edward quietly. "Sir, ever since the international engines took up residence at Vickerstown, there has been a shortage of berths for the rest of us. Is there anything you can do to fix this problem?" "So that's what this is about," laughed Sir Topham Hatt. "I was beginning to think this was all a conspiracy to get Fergus here to pull the express. Well, I have some good news and bad news. The good news is that Sodor is no longer the staging area for the Great Railway Show, so the international engines don't have to stay here anymore." The engines cheered happily. They were looking forward to getting their sheds back. "At the same time, this does not mean that the international engines are being forced to leave Sodor, so if some of them wish to spend the nights here between their competitions, then I will not stop them from doing so. You will all have to learn how to share. Let this, incident be a lesson to you all. Thomas and Percy gave the engines such a warm welcome yesterday that I wouldn't be surprised if most of them decide to stay. These sheds are not just meant for you. They are meant to be shared with all engines, permanent and visiting. The engines realized how selfish they were being and quickly set to work. Like Sir Topham Hatt had predicted, most of the engines decided to stay on Sodor. It was far less crazy on the island than the mainland. Best of all, the Sodor engines and international engines quickly became accustomed with one another, and any ill feelings were immediately dissolved. Now that we've got that mess out of the way, chuckled Thomas, let the games begin. Good luck, everyone. It was going to be a busy few months on Sodor indeed.